The tour bus limped into Pinewood, Montana at 11:47 p.m., trailing smoke like a dying dragon. Colt Hendricks watched through tinted windows as the town's single stoplight blinked red, then green, then red again for an audience of absolutely no one. Population 3,200 according to the faded sign, and he'd bet half of them were asleep by 9 o'clock. His manager, Rick, had promised him the bus would make it to Seattle without issue. But here they were, stuck in a town that probably thought Spotify was a type of rash. Colt pulled his Stetson lower over his eyes and tried not to think about the sold-out arena waiting for him tomorrow night. "How long?" he asked Rick, who was arguing with the mechanic through the cracked bus door. The mechanic, a grizzled man in coveralls with Jerry's Garage stitched above the pocket, kept shaking his head and pointing at something under the hood that apparently required actual welding. Madison, Colt's girlfriend, was sprawled across a leather couch scrolling through Instagram, her lips pursed in that way that meant she was documenting their rustic adventure for her 2.3 million followers. "This is so authentic," she purred, snapping a selfie with a stoplight in the background. Colt had won 3 Grammys, headline festivals in front of 80,000 people, and right now he'd traded all for a working transmission and a Starbucks that stayed open past sunset. Rick climbed back on the bus with bad news written all over his face. "Earliest we can get parts is tomorrow afternoon, maybe evening if the supplier in Billings comes through," he said, loosening his tie like the small-town air was too thick for Los Angeles lungs. Colt's drummer Max groaned from the back, and his bassist Jenna muttered something creative involving Jerry, his garage, and anatomical impossibilities. Madison perked up, already calculating content opportunities. Small-town hotel, probably with floral wallpaper and quilts, so vintage, so Instagram-worthy, so perfectly on brand for her Madison Discovers America series. Colt just wanted a shower, a bed, and to wake up from this nightmare where his $2 million tour bus had been defeated by a town that probably still had a Blockbuster video somewhere. Hello, my friends. Before we continue our story, leave your like, share the story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. The Pinewood Diner sat at a corner of Main Street in nowhere, its neon sign buzzing with the enthusiasm of a dying bee. Colt pushed through the door at 7 a.m., having spent the night in the town's only hotel, which smelled like pine cleaner and shattered dreams. The diner was crowded. Apparently, this was where Pinewood's entire population came to gossip over burnt coffee and hash browns. Every head turned when he walked in, then immediately tried to pretend they weren't staring at the Grammy winner in their midst. A waitress with kind eyes and a name tag reading Dottie pointed him toward a corner booth, the vinyl seats patched with duct tape that had probably been there since Reagan. Madison had refused to come, claiming she needed her beauty rest and couldn't possibly eat anything fried before noon. Rick was still at the garage, breathing down Jerry's neck and probably making everything take twice as long. Colt ordered black coffee and whatever breakfast special came with the fewest vowels in its name, then pulled out his phone to scroll through the damage control Rick was doing about their canceled Seattle show. The texts were brutal. Venue management, promoters, fans demanding refunds, sponsors reconsidering their partnership opportunities. One night in Pinewood, Montana was costing him approximately $400,000 in revenue, and that wasn't counting the reputation hit. He was reading a particularly nasty email from his label when someone approached his table with coffee. "Morning," said a soft voice, and Colt looked up to see a woman in her late 20s, blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a volunteer fire department t-shirt that had seen better decades. She refilled his cup without being asked, her movements efficient, like someone who'd been doing this work forever. There was something about her face. No makeup, no filter, just genuine tiredness and genuine kindness competing for real estate around her eyes. "You're Colt Hendricks," she said, and it wasn't a question, but it wasn't an accusation either. "Last time I checked," Colt said, trying for charm but landing somewhere closer to exhaustion. The woman smiled, a quick flash that didn't quite reach her eyes, then pulled a napkin from her apron. "I know you probably get this all the time, but could I maybe get your autograph? My little sister loves your music." She handed him a pen, looking embarrassed, like she was asking for something she didn't deserve. Colt felt a strange pang. Everyone in L.A. wanted something from him, but they wanted it with entitlement, with the assumption that his signature or his time or his money was already theirs. This woman asked like she expected him to say no. He signed a napkin to Riley's sister, Stay Country, Colt Hendricks, before actually processing that her name was Riley. "That's you?" he asked, pointing at her name tag, and she nodded, tucking the napkin into her pocket, like it was something precious. "I'm Riley McKenna. Sorry, I should have introduced myself properly. I volunteer at the fire station, but I pick up shifts here when they need extra hands." She gestured vaguely around the diner, at the crowd of farmers and truckers and teachers who were definitely not pretending to ignore them anymore. Colt noticed her hands were calloused, nails cut short, no rings except a simple silver band on her right hand that looked handmade. Before Riley could say more, the diner door crashed open and Madison made her entrance. She wore white skinny jeans, a crop top that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and designer sunglasses despite the morning overcast sky. "There you are," she announced, like Colt had been hiding instead of eating breakfast. She slid into the booth across from him, wrinkling her nose at the vinyl seats, then noticed Riley standing there with the coffee pot. "Can we get some almond milk? And do you have anything that's, like, organic? Grain-free?" This place probably doesn't even know what keto means. Riley's expression didn't change except for a slight tightening around her mouth. "We have regular milk, and the breakfast special comes with toast," she said evenly, her Montana accent softening her vowels in a way Madison immediately latched onto. "Oh my God, that accent," Madison said, not quite to Riley but definitely about her. "It's so cute, like a movie or something. Where are we even, Wyoming?" Riley opened her mouth, probably corrected with Montana, but Madison was already pulling out her phone to document the authentic American diner experience for her followers. Colt felt uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite name, watching Madison angle her phone to exclude Riley from the shot while simultaneously using the diner as a prop. "Can you get us whatever's quickest?" he asked Riley, trying to inject some courtesy into the conversation. Riley nodded and turned to go, but Madison called after her, voice dripping with something that might have been concern if you didn't know better. "And sweetie, you might want to check that shirt. It's got a stain, like, right there." She pointed to a barely visible spot on Riley's shoulder, and several nearby tables definitely heard. Riley glanced down, color rising in her cheeks, then walked back to the kitchen with her spine straight and her dignity intact. "She seemed nice," Colt said carefully, sipping his coffee and hating himself a little. Madison was already editing her photos, applying the rustic Americana filter she developed specifically for occasions like this. "She's desperate for attention," Madison said without looking up. "That whole my sister love you thing. Please." She probably doesn't even have a sister. Colt didn't respond, but something about the encounter stuck with him like a splinter. The way Riley had asked for the autograph like she was bothering him. The way she'd handled Madison's rudeness with grace. The way her hands looked like they belonged to someone who actually worked for a living. Riley brought their food 12 minutes later, setting down plates of eggs and hash browns with the kind of quiet efficiency Colt associated with really expensive restaurants, not diners where everything cost $7.99. "Anything else I can get you?" she asked, directing the question to both of them but looking at the table, not their faces. Madison didn't answer, too busy photographing her small town breakfast adventure from 6 different angles. Colt said no thanks, and Riley disappeared back toward the kitchen where Dottie was barking orders at a line cook who looked about 16. He watched her go, noticing how several locals nodded at her, how a little kid waved from a booth near the door. "You're staring," Madison said, not looking up from her phone. "Just people watching," Colt replied, which was partially true. Growing up in a town not much bigger than Pinewood before Nashville happened, he remembered what it was like when everybody knew everybody, when your reputation was built on how you treated people, not how many followers you had. Madison had grown up in Calabasas, in a house with a pool and a wine cellar and parents who bought her a Mercedes for her 16th birthday. She didn't understand places like this, where working 3 jobs wasn't ambition, it was survival. They were almost done eating when Rick rushed in, his tie askew, and his hair doing things hair shouldn't do. "We've got a problem," he announced, which was becoming his catchphrase on this tour. "Jerry says the transmission's completely shot, Needs a custom part, they have an order from Germany. Germany. We're talking at least a week, maybe 2. The words landed like a bomb in the quiet diner, and Colt felt every head turn toward their booth again. A week in Pinewood, Montana. 2 weeks. 14 days in a town with 1 stoplight, and probably 0 nightlife, and nothing to do except watch his career implode in real time. Madison stood up so fast she knocked her water glass over, ice skittering across the table like shrapnel. 2 weeks? Are you kidding me? I have a brand partnership presentation in L.A. on Thursday. I have a photo shoot on Friday. I have a life that doesn't involve being trapped in Mayberry. She was loud enough that even the kitchen went quiet, and Colt saw Riley reappear with a towel to clean up the spilled water. Rick was already on his phone, calling everyone he could think of, other tour buses, private jets, anything that could extract him from Montana before the whole tour collapsed. The numbers he was throwing around made Colt's head spin. $50,000 to charter a plane, $80,000 to rent a replacement bus, $100,000 to reschedule the next 3 shows. Rick, hold on, Colt said, his brain doing the math that his business degree from Belmont had actually prepared him for. If we charter, we blow through the tour budget and probably go into the red. If we reschedule, we lose deposits, we piss off venues, we lose momentum. Rick looked at him like he'd suggested they start their own transmission repair business. Madison looked at him like he'd suggested they move to Pinewood permanently. But Colt had learned early in his career that sometimes the best move was to stop bleeding money and accept you'd lost a battle. We cancel Seattle. We push the next shows back 2 weeks. We take the hit. It's cheaper than the alternatives. Riley had been quietly mopping up the water, trying to be invisible, but Madison's attention snapped to her like a heat-seeking missile. This is all your town's fault, you know that? Your backwards little nowhere town with your 1 garage and your 1 mechanic, who probably learned everything he knows from YouTube. Riley straightened up, towel in hand, her expression still neutral, but something hardening behind her eyes. Jerry's been fixing engines since before you were born, ma'am, she said, her voice quiet but firm. He'll get your bus running soon as the parts come in. The ma'am landed like a slap, polite and pointed, and Madison's face went red. Did you seriously just... Madison started, but Colt cut her off, standing up and pulling out his wallet. We're good here, thanks, he said to Riley, dropping 2 20s on the table for a $12 meal. Riley tried to give him change, but he waved her off, eager to get Madison out of the diner before she made an even bigger scene. As they headed for the door, Madison turned back one more time, her voice carrying across the entire restaurant. Must be nice, she called to Riley, not having anywhere to be, nothing important to do, just serving coffee and playing firefighter. Some of us have real lives. The diner went completely silent. Riley didn't respond, just started clearing their table with mechanical precision. But Colt saw her hands trembling slightly as she stacked the plates. He should have said something. Should have told Madison to shut up. Should have apologized to Riley on behalf of people who peaked in high school and never learned humility. Instead, he followed Madison out to the rental car Rick had secured, hating himself a little more with each step. Behind them, Dottie put her hand on Riley's shoulder and said something Colt couldn't hear. Riley shook her head and disappeared into the kitchen, taking the coffee pot and Colt's last shred of self-respect with her. That evening, Colt sat in his hotel room scrolling through social media while Madison posted a series of stories about being trapped in small-town America with lots of eye rolls and designer outfits posed against rustic backdrops. His fans were sympathetic, offering condolences and tagging him in posts about #PoorColt and #Montana Disaster. Rick had managed to reschedule most of the tour, pushing everything back 17 days, which would cost him roughly $300,000 in penalties and lost revenue, but was better than the alternatives. Colt nursed a whiskey from a minibar and tried not to think about Riley McKenna's face when Madison had said playing firefighter, like volunteer work, was a hobby for the board instead of a calling for the brave. At 11:43 p.m., the fire alarm shattered the night like a hammer through glass. Colt woke up disoriented, his room lit orange through the curtains, the smell of smoke already creeping under the door. He yanked on jeans and ran into the hallway where Rick was already herding band members toward the stairs, everyone in pajamas and panic. What's burning? Max shouted over the alarm, and someone yelled back, "The garage!" Colt's stomach dropped. Jerry's garage. His bus. Every piece of equipment they couldn't replace. Every guitar that had been with him since Nashville. Every notebook filled with lyrics he hadn't recorded yet. They made it outside to find half a pine wood already gathered in the street, lit by flames that towered 20 feet high from Jerry's garage 2 blocks away. The volunteer fire department was already there. 3 trucks and a dozen firefighters attacking the blaze with water and foam and desperate courage. Colt ran toward the scene, Rick shouting something behind him about safety and insurance and staying back. He didn't care. That was his bus, his life. 12 years of work and dreams and proof that a kid from nowhere could become something. A firefighter grabbed him to the perimeter, holding him back, shouting that the structure was unstable, that the fuel from his bus was feeding the fire, that it was too dangerous. Then he saw her, Riley McKenna, dressed in full firefighter gear that looked 2 sizes too big, her face smudged with ash, running toward the burning building instead of away from it. "Riley, no!" Someone screamed, Dottie from the diner, standing with a group of horrified locals. But Riley was already inside, disappearing into smoke and flame like she'd done this 1,000 times or was crazy or both. Colt's heart hammered against his ribs, counting seconds that felt like hours. The fire chief was yelling into his radio, calling for backup from the next town over, saying something about propane tanks and evacuation zones. 15 seconds. 30. 45. Riley emerged from the inferno, carrying a guitar case in one arm and supporting a woman with the other, Jerry's wife, Linda, who worked the garage office. Behind them came 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10, clinging to Riley's coat as she guided them toward safety. Paramedics rushed forward, taking the family, checking for smoke inhalation and burns. Riley went back in. What the hell is she doing? Colt shouted to no one and everyone, but the fire chief just shook his head, pride and terror mixing on his face. "Her job," he said simply. 90 seconds later, Riley came out again, this time with 2 more guitar cases and a laptop bag, her arms blistered red where the coat hand protected her, her breathing harsh and labored. "That's everything that was salvageable from the bus office," she said to the fire chief, her voice hoarse from smoke. She handed the laptop to Rick, who took it numbly, and then she noticed Colt standing there like an idiot while she just run into a burning building to save his stuff. "Your guitars," she said, setting them down carefully on the pavement. "Jerry said these were custom, irreplaceable. I got 3 of them, but the 4th was already—" She stopped, swaying slightly, and Colt realized she wasn't okay, wasn't even close to okay. Her arms were burned, her face was gray under the ash, and she'd risked her life for his material possessions. "You're hurt," he said, reaching for her, but she stepped back like his touch might contaminate her. "I'm fine." Linda and the kids were sleeping in the apartment above the garage. Jerry's been working late. They were staying there to keep him company. If the fire had spread to the gas station. She didn't finish, but Colt understood. The entire town, his band. Everyone could have been in serious danger if that fire had reached the fuel tanks 200 yards away. Riley had probably saved dozens of lives, and she'd somehow found time to grab his guitars while she was at it. Paramedics were trying to guide her toward the ambulance, but she kept shaking them off, insisting others were hurt worse, that she was fine, that it was just some burns. Madison appeared beside him, her phone out, filming the chaos. "This is insane, babe. My followers are going to die," she said, panning across the flames and firefighters and people in pajamas watching their town nearly burn down. Colt felt something snap inside him, some wire that had been stretched too tight for too long. He grabbed her phone and shoved it in his pocket. "Put that away," he said, voice low and dangerous. Madison stared at him like he'd slapped her. "Excuse me? This is content gold." She stopped talking when she saw his expression. Around them, firefighters were finally getting the blaze under control, but Jerry's garage was a total loss, and Colt's bus was a blackened skeleton of what had been. Riley finally let the paramedics take her to the ambulance, and Colt followed without thinking, Madison trailing behind them, muttering about overreaction and insurance. They laid Riley on a gurney and started treating her burns, and Colt got his first good look at the damage, second-degree burns covering both forearms where she'd shielded her face, blisters already forming, skin angry and raw. "Why did you go back in?" he asked, knowing it was a stupid question but needing to understand. Riley looked at him with those tired, kind eyes that hadn't changed even after running through fire. "Because those guitars matter to you," she said simply. "And Linda and her kids matter to everyone." The Pinewood Medical Clinic wasn't really a hospital, more like an urgent care center that served 4 counties and kept hours when the doctor felt like it. But at 2 a.m. with burn victims and smoke inhalation cases, Dr. Peterson had come in still wearing his pajama pants under his coat. Riley sat on an examination table, her arms bandaged and her face pale, while the doctor explained she'd be fine in a few weeks. The burns would heal. She'd been lucky. Colt sat in the waiting room because Rick had physically prevented him from following Riley into the exam room, probably recognizing that a Grammy winner hovering over a small-town firefighter might create complications nobody needed. Madison had gone back to the hotel, claiming the smoke was aggravating her allergies, and she needed her sleep mask and aromatherapy diffuser. Rick was dealing with the insurance company, having the worst conversation of his career about how, yes, the tour bus had been destroyed in a fire, and no, it wasn't arson. It was just terrible luck in Montana. Max and Jenna were talking quietly in the corner, looking at the 3 guitar cases Riley had saved like they were sacred relics. Those guitars were worth maybe $40,000 combined, custom instruments built by a luthier in Nashville, instruments Colt had used to write half his hit songs. Riley had risked her life for $40,000 worth of wood and strings, when she probably made less than that in 2 years. Dr. Peterson emerged from the exam room 90 minutes later, looking tired but satisfied. "She's going to be fine," he told the small crowd that had gathered. Dottie, the fire chief, a couple other firefighters, and Colt. 2nd-degree burns on both arms. Some smoke inhalation, exhaustion. "I want her to rest for at least a week. Keep the burns clean and bandaged, no strenuous activity." He looked directly at the fire chief when he said that last part, and the chief nodded. "She's benched until those burns heal. I don't care what she says." Colt felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by guilt that his relief mattered, that he had any stake in whether Riley McKenna lived or died. They let him see her after the doctor left, and Colt found her sitting up on the exam table, her arms wrapped in bandages from wrist to elbow, her blonde hair matted with ash. "Hey," he said, feeling inadequate and stupid. "Hey," she replied, not quite meeting his eyes. The silence stretched between them like taffy, uncomfortable and sticky. "Thank you doesn't really cover it," Colt finally said, "but thank you for saving my guitars and Linda and those kids and probably the whole damn town." Riley shrugged with one shoulder, wincing when the movement pulled at her burns. "It's what we do. Volunteer means you don't get paid, not that you don't take it seriously." Something about that hit Colt wrong, the implication that anyone thought volunteer firefighting wasn't real work. "Madison shouldn't have said that stuff," he offered, and Riley's laugh was short and bitter. "Your girlfriend thinks I'm nobody, and honestly, she's not wrong. I'm a waitress who plays firefighter on weekends. That's what she sees because that's what's here." Colt wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that anybody who runs into burning buildings is somebody, but Riley kept talking. "I should have introduced myself properly. I'm Riley McKenna, volunteer firefighter, part-time diner waitress, full-time disappointment to everyone who ever believed in me." "That's not," Colt started, but Riley cut him off with a look that was equal parts exhaustion and "don't bullshit me." "I turned down Juilliard," she said, like she was confessing to murder. "Full scholarship, vocal performance program. Everything I'd worked for since I was 8 years old. I had a suitcase packed, had my dorm assignment, had my whole life planned out." She stared at her bandaged hands, and Colt waited because this felt important. Felt like something she didn't tell many people. "Then my dad died. Heart attack at 47, no warning, no time to prepare. Left me with 3 siblings. Sarah was 14, Jake was 12, Emma was 9. The numbers aligned in Colt's head, painting a picture he really didn't want to see. "You stayed," he said, and it wasn't questioned. Riley nodded. "Mom had left years before, couldn't handle small-town life or 4 kids, or a husband who worked too hard for too little money. It was just us, and there was life insurance, but it wasn't much, and someone had to stay. Someone had to raise them, feed them, keep them in school. So I wrote Juilliard a very polite letter declining their scholarship, and I got a job at Dottie's Diner, and I learned to be a firefighter because the town needed volunteers, and it came with a small stipend. Colt felt like he'd been punched in the chest. Juilliard. She'd turned down Juilliard, one of the most prestigious performing arts schools in the country, the kind of opportunity people killed for. How old were you? He asked, though he'd already done the math. 21, Riley said. I'd taken a gap year to save money, working and applying for scholarships. Had it all figured out. Then suddenly I was a legal guardian raising teenagers while working double shifts and tried to keep them from realizing how scared I was that I couldn't do it. Her voice cracked on the last word, and Colt saw her eyes go shiny before she blinked the tears away. Where are they now? Colt asked, and Riley's face softened the way faces do when people talk about family they actually love. Sarah's at Montana State studying engineering. Full ride. Jake just graduated high school, working at the garage with Jerry until he figures out what's next. Emma's a junior, straight as, wants to be a veterinarian. They all turned out okay despite having me as a parent. The way she said it, like she hadn't sacrificed her entire life to make sure those kids had chances she'd given up, made Colt angry in a way he couldn't quite explain. You raised them, he said. You kept them together, got them educated, kept them safe. That's not nothing. Riley looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted from defensive to vulnerable. When I saw your guitars in Jerry's office, I thought about my voice teacher from high school, Mrs. Chun. She cried when I told her I wasn't going to Juilliard. Said I had a gift. Said gifts like mine came along once in a generation. Said I was throwing away my chance. I haven't sung anything but hymns at church in 7 years because it hurts too much to remember what I gave up. She touched her bandaged arms. But tonight, when I grabbed those guitars, I thought maybe I could save someone else's dream even if I couldn't save my own. 3 days later, Colt was sitting in Dottie's Diner at 2 p.m. when his sound engineer called with terrible news. Jasmine Ray, his opening act, had viral laryngitis and was out for at least 2 weeks. She can't even whisper, Tony said over speakerphone, and the Nashville show is in 4 days. We need to find a replacement or we cancel, and if we cancel Nashville after already rescheduling Seattle. He didn't finish, but Colt knew the implications. Nashville was his hometown show. The Bridgestone Arena, 18,000 fans, critics from Rolling Stone and Billboard. Canceling Nashville would be like canceling Christmas. Rick was already making calls, reaching out to every up-and-coming artist who might be available on 4 days' notice. But everyone was either booked or asking for money they couldn't afford. Madison was back in L.A., having left the morning after the fire claiming she'd done her time in rural hell and needed to get back to her actual life. She posted a tearful goodbye video that was 60% her looking gorgeous against Montana mountains and 40% complaints about small-town limitations. Colt had watched it once and wanted to throw his phone through a window. Max and Jenna were getting cabin fever, spending their days hiking and their nights drinking at Pinewood's one bar. Colt was halfway through his third cup of coffee when Riley came in for her shift, her arm still bandaged but healing well according to Dr. Peterson. She moved carefully, keeping her burns away from hot surfaces, taking orders with her usual quiet efficiency. Dottie fussed over her like a mother hen, insisting she take breaks and not lift anything heavy. Colt had avoided talking to her since the hospital, partly because he didn't know what to say and partly because every time he looked at her bandaged arms, he felt guilty that she'd been hurt saving his possessions. But now, watching her navigate the lunch rush with grace and competence, Colt remembered what she'd said about Juilliard, about her gift, about not singing anything but church hymns for 7 years. A crazy idea started forming in his head, the kind of idea Rick would immediately shoot down, the kind of idea that could either save the Nashville show or make everything exponentially worse. Tony, he said into the phone, I might have a solution. Can you meet us in Nashville day after tomorrow? Tony sounded skeptical but agreed, and Colt hung up before Rick could ask questions he didn't want to answer yet. He waited until Riley's shift ended at 4 p.m., then caught her in the parking lot as she was heading to her truck, a 1990s Ford that had more rust than paint. Riley, can I ask you something crazy? She turned, surprised, her hand instinctively going to her bandaged arm like She thought he was going to mention the fire. "Depends on how crazy," she said, trying for humor, but landing somewhere closer to nervous. Cole took a breath and jumped. "I need an opening act for Nashville in 4 days. I know you haven't performed in years. I know your arms are hurt. I know this is completely insane. But I heard you humming while you worked today, and—" "No," Riley interrupted, her face going pale. "Absolutely not. I waitress and I volunteer. I don't perform. I can't perform. I gave that up." But Colt had seen the way her face had softened when she talked about saving someone else's dream, had heard the longing in her voice when she mentioned Mrs. Chin crying over her lost gift. "One song," he pressed. "Just come to Nashville, audition for my sound engineer, one song. If you're terrible, we never mention it again. If you're good, you open a show, I pay you $5,000 for one night, and you go back to your life here." The number clearly shocked her. $5,000 was probably 3 months' salary at the diner. Riley was shaking her head before he finished talking. "I don't have anything to wear. I don't have arrangements. I don't even know what I'd sing. And my arms." She held up the bandages like evidence in a trial where she was both defendant and prosecutor. "You can sing with bandaged arms," Colt said, softer now. "And I have a wardrobe team, and my band knows every country standard ever written. The question is, can you still sing, or did you bury that gift so deep it's gone?" It was a low blow, and he knew it, weaponizing her own words from the hospital, but he needed her to say yes. She stood there for a long moment, her truck keys dangling from one hand, her face cycling through emotions like a slot machine. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why me? You could get any singer in Nashville, anyone with experience and credentials, and—" She stopped, and Colt saw the real question behind the question. "Why would someone like you want someone like me?" "Because," Colt said, meeting her eyes, "you saved my guitars thinking about your lost dream. I want to give you one night to remember what that dream felt like. No obligations, no pressure. Just one audition with the best sound engineer in Nashville. Then you decide." Riley's laugh was shaky and disbelieving. "You're serious. You're actually serious." Colt nodded, watching hope and terror war across her face. "Sarah comes home from college this weekend." Riley said slowly, thinking out loud, "Jake can watch Emma. I'd only be gone 2 days, maybe 3. She was talking herself into it. And Colt stayed very still, afraid to spook her. "One audition," she said finally. "I'll do one audition. But if your sound engineer says I'm terrible, you promise to never mention this again to anyone ever." Colt stuck out his hand for her to shake. "Deal." The next day, they flew to Nashville on a chartered plane Rick had arranged, and Riley spent the entire flight looking out the window like she'd never seen clouds before. She probably hadn't flown much. Juilliard would have been her first plane ride, the adventure she'd given up. Colt left her alone with her thoughts, reviewing the Nashville show logistics with Rick, and trying not to imagine all the ways this could backfire. If Riley couldn't sing if she froze, if she proved Madison right about small-town waitresses playing at dreams they couldn't sustain, he'd have humiliated her on a national stage and destroyed any chance of salvaging the opening act situation. They arrived at Ocean Way Studios at 3 p.m. on Tuesday, and Tony was waiting with the band, and enough skepticism to sink a battleship. "This is your solution?" he asked, looking at Riley in her jeans and volunteer firefighter t-shirt, her arms still bandaged, her whole presence screaming, "I don't belong here." "This is Riley McKenna," Colt said, firm enough that Tony's eyebrows rose. "She's going to audition, and we're going to keep our mouths shut and our minds open. Riley, what do you want to sing?" She looked terrified, like she was about to bolt for the door, but she swallowed hard and said, "Amazing Grace." Just me and piano. The studio went quiet as Riley stood in front of the microphone, her bandaged arms hanging at her sides, her face pale but determined. The piano player, a session musician who'd worked with everyone from Taylor Swift to Willie Nelson, played the opening chords of Amazing Grace, simple and pure. Colt held his breath. Tony crossed his arms, clearly expecting disaster. Rick looked like he was praying. And then Riley opened her mouth, and sound came out that didn't seem possible from a human throat. Her voice was liquid gold, starting low and then soaring to heights that made the hair on Colt's arms stand up. It wasn't just technically perfect, though it was at every note precise and controlled. It was emotionally devastating. She sang Amazing Grace like she meant every word, like she'd been lost and found and saved and broken and put back together. The traditional hymn became something new under her interpretation, something that acknowledged 7 years of sacrifice and loss, and keeping going anyway. When she hit the high note on Was Blind, But Now I See, Colt felt his throat tighten, and he wasn't the only one. The song lasted maybe 3 minutes, but it felt like stepping outside of time into a moment that would define everything that came after. When Riley finished, the last note hanging in the air like a prayer, nobody moved. The silence stretched for 5, 10, 15 seconds. Then Tony stood up, walked to the microphone, and said very quietly, "That's the best voice I've heard in 20 years. He turned to Colt. "You're not having her open. She's doing a full duet set with you, equal billing or I quit." The piano player was openly crying. The drummer looked like he'd been hit with a hammer. Riley looked stunned, like she couldn't process what had just happened. I haven't performed in years. I don't have arrangements. I can't." But Tony was already pulling up set lists on his laptop, talking about which songs would showcase her range, which harmonies would work best with Colt's voice. Rick was calling the venue to update the promotional materials. Colt Hendricks featuring Riley McKenna, one night only, Nashville's Bridgestone Arena. Colt walked over to Riley, who looked like she might faint or throw up, or both. "You okay?" he asked, and she shook her head. "I'm not okay. This is insane. 2 days ago I was serving coffee. Now I'm supposedly performing at Bridgestone Arena? 2 days ago you saved my life's work from a fire," Colt reminded her. Maybe it's time somebody returned the favor. They spent the next 2 days rehearsing, and Riley proved that natural talent plus 7 years of singing church hymns every Sunday had kept her voice in shape. She learned harmonies in one take, remembered arrangements after hearing them once, and had stage presence that came from somewhere deep and genuine. Colt found himself looking forward to rehearsals, not just because the music was incredible, but because Riley's joy at singing again was infectious. She'd arrive at the studio with coffee and gratitude, stay late perfecting transitions, and treat the session musicians like valued colleagues instead of hired help. The night before the show, they were running through their final number, a duet version of Tennessee Whiskey that Tony had arranged, when Riley's phone rang. She ignored it once, twice, then stepped out of the studio looking worried. Colt followed, concerned, and found her in the hallway arguing in hushed tones. "I don't care what she says, Jake. I'm not stalking anyone. I'm working. Yes, working. No, it's not, Jake. I have to go. We're in the middle of rehearsal." She hung up and slumped against the wall, looking defeated. "Everything okay?" Colt asked, and Riley laughed without humor. "Your girlfriend posted something on Instagram," she said, pulling up her phone and showing him. The post was Madison at some L.A. party, looking gorgeous in designer everything, with a caption that made Colt's blood run cold. "When you're trying to move on but some small-town wannabe is literally stalking your man across state lines. Stay in your lane. Sweetheart nail polish hashtag desperate hashtag not worth hashtag know your place." The post had 47,000 likes and 3,000 comments, most of them agreeing with Madison, calling Riley a clout chaser and a nobody and worse. Several identified her by name, posted photos from her Facebook, tagged her siblings. Colt felt rage build in his chest like magma. "This is slander," he said, already calling Rick. "We'll sue, we'll get it taken down, But Riley stopped with a hand on his arm. "Don't," she said quietly. "She's right. I am nobody. I'm a waitress from Montana who probably has no business being here. Maybe I should just go home, save you the embarrassment." She looked small and defeated and nothing like the woman who'd run into a burning building or sung Amazing Grace like an angel. Colt wanted to shake her, wanted to make her see herself the way he was starting to see her, as someone extraordinary who'd been told she was ordinary for so long she'd started to believe it. "You are the most talented singer I've heard in a decade," Colt said, his voice hard. "You gave up Juilliard to raise 3 kids. You saved my guitars while your arms were literally burning. And you can outsing 90% of professionals I work with. Madison is wrong. She's always been wrong. And tomorrow night, 18,000 people are going to realize that. Riley's eyes were shiny with unshed tears, but she nodded, taking a breath, pulling herself together. They went back into the studio, and Colt texted Rick a single instruction. Find out everything about what Madison's been doing in L.A. I want receipts. The Bridgestone Arena filled up fast. 18,000 country music fans who bought tickets expecting Colt Hendricks and getting Riley McKenna as a surprise bonus. Backstage, Riley was having a quiet panic attack in her dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror like she didn't recognize the woman looking back. The wardrobe team had transformed her into something that belonged on stage, a flowing navy dress that moved like water, her blonde hair styled in loose waves, makeup that enhanced instead of hiding. She was stunning, and she looked terrified. Colt knocked on her door, waited for permission, then entered with bottled water and confidence he didn't entirely feel. I can't do this, Riley said immediately, her hands shaking. There are 18,000 people out there, and Madison's post has 100,000 likes now, and everyone thinks I'm a stalker, and I'm going to forget the words or mess up a harmony or... Colt took her hands, careful of the healing burns on her arms. Riley McKenna, he said, making her look at him. You've already done the hard part. You raised 3 kids while working 3 jobs. You ran into a burning building. You sang Amazing Grace in a room full of strangers and made a professional sound engineer cry. Going on stage is nothing compared to what you've already survived. She took a shaky breath, then another, then nodded. Okay, I can do this. I've sung in front of the church congregation, right? This is just a bigger congregation. Colt smiled, recognizing the self-talk of someone who'd spent years convincing herself she was capable. It's exactly like a bigger congregation, he agreed, except they paid money to be here, and they're all hoping for something transcendent. No pressure. Riley laughed despite herself, and some of the tension left her shoulders. There was a knock on the door. 5 minutes to places. Colt squeezed her hands once more, then left her collect herself, his own nerves jumping like live wires. The show opened with Colt's hits, the crowd singing along to songs they'd heard on radio for years, and the energy was electric. But Colt was counting minutes until Riley's entrance, hoping she wouldn't freeze, hoping Madison's poison hadn't infected enough people to ruin this moment. At the 40-minute mark, he paused the show, addressed the crowd directly. I want to tell you a story, he said, his voice carrying to the cheap seats. About 3 weeks ago, my tour bus broke down in a town called Pinewood, Montana. Population 3,200. And I met a woman there who served me coffee, asked for an autograph for her sister, and got insulted by someone in my life who should have known better. The arena went quiet, everyone leaning in. That woman ran into a burning building and saved my guitars, instruments that mean everything to me. She also saved a family and probably prevented the whole town from going up in flames. She did all this despite having second-degree burns on her arms. He paused, letting that sink in. What I didn't know until later was that this woman turned down a full scholarship to Juilliard 7 years ago to raise her 3 younger siblings after their father died. She gave up her dream to make sure they could have theirs. And tonight, she's giving performance another try. Please welcome to the stage, making her professional debut, Riley McKenna. Riley walked out from the wings, her navy dress catching the stage lights, her face a mask of terror and determination. The crowd applauded politely but reservedly. They didn't know her, weren't sure what to expect, had probably seen Madison's Instagram post. Colt met her at center stage, handed her a microphone, and watched as she took her position. The band started Amazing Grace, the same arrangement she'd sung in the studio. And then Riley opened her mouth and silenced 18,000 people with the first note. She sang like she was singing in church, like the crowd was her congregation, like every word was true and vital and meant just for them. By the second verse, people were recording on their phones, capturing something they instinctively knew was special. By the final chorus, the entire arena was on its feet, and when she hit the last note, pure and high and impossible, the applause was deafening. Colt watched tears stream down Riley's face as she took in a standing ovation, watched her mouth, "Thank you," over and over, watched her become a performer she was supposed to be 7 years ago. They did 3 more duets, each one better than the last, their voices blending like they'd been singing together for decades. By the end of the set, the crowd was chanting Riley's name, and Colt's phone was exploding with texts from industry people asking, "Who is she? And where'd you find her? And can I have her number?" Backstage after the show, Riley was surrounded by well-wishers and reporters and people wanting selfies, and she handled it with the same grace she'd shown serving coffee in Pinewood. Colt watched from a distance, letting her have this moment, letting her experience what it felt like to be seen and celebrated and recognized. Rick appeared at his elbow with a tablet and an expression Colt recognized as, "I have information you want but won't like." "What did you find?" Colt asked, and Rick pulled up a file that was clearly marked Madison Cross, LA Activities Investigation. The first photo made Colt's stomach drop. Madison and Rick, his manager Rick, leaving a hotel together at 2 a.m. Madison and Rick having lunch at Nobu, holding hands across the table. Madison and Rick at a party in the Hollywood Hills, her hand on his thigh, his hand in her hair. The photos were dated over the past 6 months, clear and damning and impossible to explain away. "How long?" Colt asked, his voice flat. Rick, the person, not Rick the manager, had the decency to look ashamed. 3 months. "I'm sorry, Colt. I was going to tell you. But there never seemed to be a right time. And then the tour, and then Montana." He trailed off, realizing nothing he said would make this better or hurt less. Colt felt cold and clear-headed. The kind of clarity that comes after betrayal, when you realize the person you trusted most has been lying to your face. "You're fired," he said simply. "Both of you. Madison's already gone and you're done. I want you off this tour by tomorrow morning." Rick started to argue, started to explain, but Colt cut him off. "You don't get to do this to me and then manage my career. Get out." Rick left, and Colt stood there in the backstage corridor feeling weirdly liberated, like he'd been carrying something heavy for months without realizing it and had finally put it down. The photos of Madison and Rick hit social media the next morning, leaked by someone in Rick's investigative team who thought the public should know the truth. Madison's stalker narrative collapsed spectacularly as her own DM history surfaced, showing her coordinating with Rick to keep Colt distracted and under control so they could siphon money from tour profits into accounts they'd opened together. The exact amount was $240,000 over 6 months, enough for fraud charges if Colt wanted to press them. Madison's followers turned on her faster than weather changes in Montana, her comment sections filling with accusations and disappointment, and people tagging Riley to apologize for believing Madison's lies. Riley, meanwhile, was in her hotel room when Colt knocked at 8 a.m. with coffee and news. "You're going viral," he said, showing her his phone. Video of her singing Amazing Grace had 15 million views on TikTok. Clips of their duets were trending on Twitter. Music websites were calling her performance the revelation of the year and speculating about where she'd been hiding all this time. Recording contracts were being offered. Management companies were fighting to represent her. Venues were asking when she'd tour. Riley looked overwhelmed and disbelieving and like she might throw up. "This can't be real," she kept saying. "This doesn't happen to people like me." "It happened," Colt said, sitting beside her on the hotel room couch. "And it's going to keep happening if you want it to. But first, I need to ask you something." Riley looked at him with those tired, kind eyes that were becoming less tired every day. "What?" she asked, and Colt took a breath, steadied himself, then jumped. "The rest of my tour is 17 more shows over the next 8 weeks. I want you as my permanent duet partner, equal billing, 50-50 split of performance fees. That's approximately $1.2 million if you do all 17 shows. I know it's fast. I know you have siblings and a life in Pinewood, but..." "Yes," Riley interrupted, then laughed at his shocked expression. "I talked to Sarah and Jake and Emma last night. They all said the same thing. Mom sacrificed her dreams for us, and if she doesn't take this chance, they'll never forgive her." Her eyes were shining. Sarah said, and I quote, "You ran into a burning building for guitars, so you're clearly bad at self-preservation anyway. You might as well sing for a living." Colt felt joy surge through his chest. The kind of joy that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with wanting Riley's voice on stage next to him for 17 more shows, and maybe longer. "So that's yes?" he asked, wanting to be sure. "That's yes," Riley confirmed. "On one condition. I want you to teach me how to perform at this level, how to handle the business side, how to not get eaten alive by this industry. I want to learn from you." Colt nodded, already planning how to structure things so Riley would be protected, promoted, and paid fairly. They sealed the deal with a handshake that lasted longer than strictly necessary, and Colt realized he was touching her hand because he wanted to, not because he needed to. The realization should have scared him. It had been less than a month since Madison, less than a month since he'd been laughing at Riley's small-town accent in Dottie's diner, but instead it felt inevitable, like a song finding its correct key. The rest of the tour was a triumph. Riley learned stagecraft like she'd been born to it, handled reporters with genuine warmth, and won over every skeptic who doubted a small-town firefighter could hold her own next to a 3-time Grammy winner. Audiences loved her, critics praised her, and industry veterans started calling Colt, asking where he'd found this generational talent, and how had she been hiding in Montana all this time. By show 12 in Austin, Colt realized he was falling in love with her. Not just her voice, but her kindness to crew members, her humility despite success, her phone calls home to her siblings where she talked them through homework and dating advice and college applications while sitting in a tour bus bathroom for privacy. He told her on show 15 in Boston, backstage before the encore, with no plan and no smooth speech prepared. "I'm falling for you," he said, and Riley looked at him like he'd announced the moon was made of cheese. "You're what?" she asked, and Colt laughed because it was ridiculous, because he'd known her for 6 weeks, and 3 of those she'd been serving him coffee, and 1 of those he'd been dating someone else. "I'm falling in love with you," he repeated, slower this time. "And I know the timing is terrible and you're processing a lot, and maybe I'm your employer, which makes this complicated, but I needed you to know." Riley was quiet for a long moment, and Colt prepared himself for rejection, for the very reasonable response that he was her business partner, and she needed to focus on her career, and mixing romance with work was a disaster waiting to happen. But then she smiled, the kind of smile that started small and grew until it took over her whole face. "Colt Hendricks," she said, using his full name like she was scolding him. "You're falling in love with me and you waited until show 15 to mention it? I've been gone since show 3 when you brought me coffee before rehearsal and remembered I take it with 1 sugar and lots of cream, even though we'd only had coffee together once." They kissed for the first time with 5 minutes to encore, their crew politely looking away, and felt like coming home after a journey Colt hadn't known he was taking. The final 2 shows were electric, their chemistry obvious to everyone watching, fans speculating online about whether the connection was real or just good performance. Colt didn't care what people thought. He'd found someone who matched his ambition with her own, his passion with hers, his success with the talent she'd been forced to bury, but never lost. After the final show in Seattle, the city they'd been trying to reach when his bus broke down in Montana, Colt got down on one knee in front of 20,000 people during the encore. "Riley McKenna," he said into his microphone, "you saved my guitar, saved my tour, and saved me from becoming the kind of person who mistakes success for significance. You're the best thing that ever happened to my life and my music. Will you marry me?" The arena went silent, then erupted when Riley said yes, her face streaming with happy tears, her ring catching the stage lights as Colt slid it onto her finger. They got married 4 months later in Pinewood, Montana, with the entire town in attendance and Dottie catering from the diner. Madison sent a bitter congratulations text that Colt deleted without reading. Rick tried to apologize via lawyer, but Colt's new management team told him where to go. Sarah, Jake, and Emma stood up as Riley's family during the ceremony, Sarah giving a speech about how their sister had saved them all and now finally got to save herself. The wedding photo showed Colt in a tuxedo and Riley in a simple white dress, standing in front of Jerry's rebuilt garage. Funded partially by Colt, partially by the town, fully by their love of Riley and appreciation for what she'd done. 6 months after that, they won their first Grammy together for Best Country Duo, Riley 7 months pregnant with twins, her acceptance speech thanking Pinewood, Montana, and everyone who believed in second chances. She never went back to waitressing, though she visited Dottie's diner every time they were home, always left massive tips, and hired Jake and Emma as part of her touring crew, so family was never far away. The final scene in their story is 5 years later. Colt and Riley on stage at the Grand Ole Opry, performing for a sold-out crowd. They're twins backstage with Sarah, who finished her engineering degree and now managed Riley's schedule. They sing Tennessee Whiskey together, their voices blending like they were always meant to harmonize. And when Riley hits the final note, pure and high and impossible, the audience rises as one in standing ovation. Colt looks at his wife, this woman who served him coffee in a small-town diner and ended up changing his entire life, and thinks about how luck isn't random but recognition, how he almost missed the best thing that ever happened to him because he was too arrogant to see past humble circumstances to extraordinary worth. Riley catches his eye and winks, because she knows exactly what he's thinking, and they bow together before walking offstage hand in hand to meet their children and live the dream they built together, one song at a time. The end.